thank you for joining us this afternoon. Unfortunately, this is probably a misnomer. It's entitled Sports Law. Hopefully, we're not going to be spending too much time talking about law, more about the practical effect of the way sport is going to be run, football is going to be run over the next season and seasons to become. Let me just introduce the panel first of all. Julian Diaz-Rainey on the far left-hand side. Julian is a partner at Pinsent Masons. Worked with City Football Group 15, 16 years?
Correct, since Sheikh Mansour took over.
First piece of work as a lawyer was to deal with sacking the caterers at Norwich City. How many years ago was that, Julian?
Too many. 20.
Too many years ago. So Julian comes on the panel. He's just led, and there'll be a limit obviously here as to what we can speak about. Julian has just led Everton's case with the Premier League on points deductions. He's also retained by Manchester City. Unfortunately, that's probably about all I can say. And also has been overseeing the COVID inquiry in England for the government. So not all sport, but mostly sport.
Cabinet Office.
Cabinet Office, make sure I got it right. Mario Flores, from the European Club Association, originally from Mexico City, coming from Switzerland today, going to be giving us an insight on behalf of his membership as to what they are thinking. And Fernando Gomez, off back to Porto tomorrow, but from Portugal, Abogados, one of the largest law firms in Portugal, and vastly experienced in dealing with acquisitions, investments. So we have a lot of knowledge here. My name's Trevor Watkins. I've been delighted. I think I've been at nearly every Soccer X over the years. It's a great brand. It's got some tremendous stakeholders and obviously brings some great people together. I'm probably best known for having owned and run AFC Bournemouth when I was much younger, had much more hair, and took it over in 1997 and run it for 5 years. I do happen to work with Julian, but you probably don't want me getting anywhere near law. I'm much happier asking questions here. Let's start off. VAR. Anybody watched the football last night? What happened, Fernando?
All the emotion and drama of a game being suspended like for 3 or 4 minutes. At the end of extra time, and then VAR came in. We saw all the fans of because Olympiacos had scored the goal, and which was there were doubts if there was an offside or not. So we saw all the actually you saw fans from both sides praying. The Italians praying that the goal was not awarded, and the Greeks also praying that the goal would be awarded, which eventually happened, and Olympiacos won. So it was interesting, the intervention of the VAR.
And how's VAR in Portugal?
You want me to be
Well, this is just a brief. This is our sort of light-hearted introduction.
You know,
to
sometimes
a
I
serious
feel,
issue.
to be honest with you, I don't support any of the big clubs. I support a smaller club, which is called Belenenses. Sometimes I have the feeling, and I'm talking not as a legal expert, as just a supporter, that VAR is only there to guarantee that the big teams don't get an illegal goal. And that's it.
There will be time for questions later as well if you want to quiz the panel on any of this. Mario, from your perspective, from an ECA perspective, your clubs, again, just from a practical perspective, are they generally for or against the use of technology to intervene in games?
Yeah, I think it's very difficult to pinpoint that general feeling about this, especially because it's football. And when you're speaking about football, emotions get in the way of almost everybody. So some people love it, some people hate it. Some people will like it 1 week, others will hate it the next one. I think the overall feeling is that it was a necessary step in the evolution of the game. I mean, at the end of the day, I think everything that is related with football has to be cornered or based on fairness. And I do think that VAR brings out more fairness into the game. Problem being that it's run by humans, and that obviously makes it not a flawless kind of system. But it does give space for a more fair kind of decision making. Especially consider that decision of the VAR, maybe we can touch upon later, but it's final, right? There's no way, or it's extremely difficult to be able to challenge a decision of field of play that they call it. So at least VAR gives a bit of more grounds or a bit more expectations that the decisions that are taken on field, which are usually non-challengeable, are the correct decisions.
And this is probably a point of the discussion as to whether we're ever going to be getting to the point, as I'll bring Julian in here, are we going to get to the point where somebody is going to take on the Premier League or the Belgian League or a referee or the technology company and say, you've cost us money?
I have to confess, it's hard to see that that will happen, but you could envisage it if a club has lost substantial income. And being a Liverpool fan, we've been in the wrong end of many decisions, including the Diaz goal that was wrongly marked as offside. So it could happen.
And we're certainly seeing that in the US now, with particular, not just in football, but leagues being challenged. What about from your perspective, Fernando, from a Portuguese perspective or general European? Do you think we're going to get to a point where, you know, if someone's got it blatantly wrong? I remember my team, Bournemouth, were relegated when Aston Villa had a goal that was a metre over the line, and the camera didn't work, so it didn't spot it.
Well, I don't think so. I think the big question with VAR is when should VAR be asked to intervene or not? And that is what is not very clear, and there are differences between different competitions in Europe. So it's and so you see, as I said, VAR does not intervene in all goal occasions. It doesn't intervene in disciplinary occasions unless there is some kind. So it's not very clear, and I think that's an area that should be common standards should be defined, and not leaving to each competition to have his own VAR protocol.
And from your perspective, Mario, in terms of the clubs, should whatever happens on the field of play then, whatever the decision of a referee, a linesman, or VAR, should that be untouchable from a legal perspective?
I mean, I think as a principle, yes. Also, because I mean, if you analyze what the principle of VAR should be, is the decision of the referee is respected, and only if there's an obvious mistake, it can be overturned. And I don't think that's happening at the moment, right? The referee goes and sees in a slow motion, frame by frame, and then they're changing decisions that are clearly not obvious mistakes. So the first use, I think that it's incorrect. But I do think that as a principle, it has to be final, maybe with some nuances, for example, around match fixing, around corruption, right? Obviously, if they can prove that a VAR referee acted fraudulently or with the aim of fixing something, obviously that should be challengeable. It has happened before. I don't know if you remember the case of Lamptey, this referee that fixed a match between South Africa and Senegal for the qualifiers of the World Cup. And it was proven that he actually made incorrect decisions willingly in order to create X amount of goals. And then FIFA banned him for life, and then the match was replayed. So I do think that same standard should be applied, at least when it comes to VAR, which is super high, obviously, because corruption, bad faith is extremely difficult to prove.
Or, as you mentioned, Fernando, what happened in Portugal recently with the referee being unable to see his screen?
It happened in a league match where, I mean, the referee made a signal, and he wanted to go to the screen and watch the repetitions of whatever happened, and someone disconnected the cables of the TV, so the referee couldn't see what he was supposed to see. So, and what could he do? I mean, of course, he had the communication, but so he was relying on what the people at the VAR room were telling him, but he could not see the images, and that was a big case. But it was not challenged, but could have been.
So panel view, VAR, technology in sport, decisions of referees, leave it as it is. No one's going to successfully challenge legally. That's your considered advice on point one.
Subject to fraud.
Subject to fraud. Let's talk about agents. We love agents. The amount of money taken out the game. Julian, can agents be properly regulated? Are we ever going to have a solution that works?
I'm not sure is the answer. The situation at the moment, I think, is becoming untenable. And you're getting a lot of families representing players now. Players also wanting to have representation by lawyers and so on. So I'm not convinced that it would be easy to ever regulate agents.
And we got some changes to a degree coming in, haven't we, Fernando, this year?
Yeah, and then we have all this, I mean, some federations, you have the regulation approved, which results from the FIFA regulation. In other places, you have the regulation suspended, so it's a big mess, no one knows. You know, when I started in the sports, with sports law and sports law practice, I mean, at that time, when you had a transfer of a player, maybe you had like one lawyer and one agent representing the player, and then you had the president at the table, and that was it. And nowadays, you have like 20 people at the table. You have 2 or 3 agents. You have a lot of lawyers, the owners of the image rights, the sponsors, everyone. So it's a big deal with a lot of different people. And I really don't know if it will be possible to regulate the agents and their activity. I think the idea of the agents having a license, it's a good idea. The decisions they make, they impact a lot in the careers of athletes, and so it's good, especially when it involves minors and young players and things like that. So it's good that they have formation, that they know what they're doing. That's key. To regulate them to the point of establishing and touching commission fees or the way they should work. I mean, that's I really don't know. It's to give you an example. In Portugal, because we're an exporting league, so we export players, and our small clubs, they rely on player sales. An important part of their budget, it comes from player sales. So they need the agents to find young unknown talent. And what clubs ask the agent is, okay, bring me a 19-year-old Brazilian player, left back, whatever. So they bring the player and they present this player to the club. There's no transfer fee because most of the clubs, smaller clubs, they can't afford a transfer fee. So the agent is not going to make money out of that. I mean, the young player will make like 2,000 or 3,000 euros a month. It doesn't. So the agent is not going to make. What the agent says to the club is, this is typical. Okay, I bring the player, we sign the player, and you give me a percentage of a future transfer. That's regular deal. This is not allowed anymore because it's double representation. If you represent the player on the signature with the club, you can't represent the club on a future transfer of the player. So this is why is this not accepted with the new regulation? Why they've touched some things that really impact on the way the market worked before. So it's I really don't know.
And Mario, for you with your member clubs, what's their? I mean, are agents a necessary evil? How do you control maybe the lunatics owning the teams from paying too much to these people?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's a secret that clubs were a big force behind the regulations, right? We supported it as an institution. The majority of our members supported it. And basically, I think it was twofold. First, because it was felt that the regulation was needed, and second, because clubs could not deal with this by themselves, right? Because everybody was saying, well, I mean, who are paying these agents so much are the clubs. So clubs can't just say, well, I'm not going to pay you anymore. But unfortunately, clubs are not that well organized if you are not given this regulation. So that was something mostly club driven. But I mean, what I think is paradoxical is that this regulation was not only driven by clubs, it was requested by everybody, including agents, right? At the beginning, they were saying, well, when FIFA deregulated the industry in 2015, it became a mess because each association had their own rules. So everybody was pushing for the regulation. But then obviously, when you start regulating, agents will start saying, well, no, but I want regulation, but not so much. So what is it that they actually want? And I think that's the impasse, because if you think about it, the status quo now is what was before. It's just that, right? Because the regulations are not applicable almost anywhere. You have the license that maybe, but the rest is just the same. So I think the difficulty, at least putting myself in FIFA's position, is what is it that you really want? Because if I give 10%, agents will ask 15%. And you give 15%, agents will request 20%. So I don't think there's going to be a set of regulations that will make the agents happy. And we've seen what happens. They're going to challenge it, and most likely they're going to start winning the thing. So at the end of the day, I think what remains is the FIFA license, which is good, I think. But then more than that, I think it will be extremely difficult for FIFA to do anything meaningful. Also, making an example on dispute resolution, that it's important, right? Now, that was also for agents. It's, okay, now you're going to be able to come to me if a player doesn't pay you, and I'm going to be able to force that player to pay you the commission. Now that doesn't exist. So also, good luck agents not getting paid. Look for the player, whoever it is, and filing a claim wherever his domicile is. And so I think that agents first need to organize themselves, because there's so many, they're so fragmented now. But then once that happens, they need to understand that you have to compromise. We compromise, FIFPro compromises, everybody compromises in this industry. And the feeling that sometimes you have is that agents are not willing to compromise. And that makes it very difficult.
So for your clients, your clubs, your members, what are the key things that people in the audience are going to see you think might be different for this coming season, the seasons beyond?
Well, first wait for the ECJ judgment, right? See if they say whatever they're going to say.
Just if you could, yeah, just for the audience, just explain a bit more.
Sorry, so the currently status is that now the regulations are suspended, save for very specific provisions. The most important one being the license. So every agent has to have a FIFA license. If they don't, clubs and players cannot deal with them. And then everything else, so maybe you heard of the caps or the prohibition of dual representation that Fernando was saying, that's suspended. So that can still happen. And that is suspended while the European Court of Justice decides on whether these provisions are anti-competitive or not. So that may happen maybe the first months of the following year, 25. And then, obviously, if the European Court of Justice says, well, these regulations are okay with me, they don't violate antitrust law, EU community law, then obviously FIFA will be more empowered to impose these regulations, with the nuance that there's some jurisdictions not subject to the ECJ, like England, Argentina, Brazil, where this will not matter, where they have also determined the suspension of these rules. So if the decision comes, depending what it says, is when the future of this regulation will see, because if the ECJ, the European Court of Justice, supports these regulations, it may well be that FIFA will try to put them through, regardless of any local decision or even arbitral award in England that might exist. So that has to wait for that. In the meantime, I think it's just going to stay as it is now.
And taking that a stage forward, as Mario was saying, Julian, there you've got the European Court of Justice looking to make a ruling, so getting involved in sport. I know you can't talk about the specifics, but for you, who spend a lot of time looking at disputes and regulatory issues particularly on finance, how much of the law really now comes into how people in the audience might be looking at their businesses and how they run it?
Well, it's vital, and just picking up on Mario, even if FIFA were to introduce the rules, they're still going to be subject to the governing law of whatever country applies. So English law offers protections to minors automatically, for example. So you have to bear in mind local laws as well, and each jurisdiction.
And again, I know we can't talk about specifics, but you've dealt and have been dealing with some very high-profile cases in a system that is new. Can you shed any light on Premier League and the way these rules have come in and what's likely to change on the financial regulation of the game in England?
So I think I mean, we obviously have the new body set up by the government, although the bill's now not going to be coming through because there's going to be an election in the UK.
So those of you who aren't from England, in England the government have decided they're going to regulate football. Good luck to them. but the government may potentially be changing in our country, so we've got to wait and see what happens. But anyway, so go on, Judith.
So you know, I think it's going to change. I think there is going to be government regulation in England, partly because there's a conflict. The clubs want, certainly at Premier League, there's different influences. So I think it's inevitable. In many ways, it is sad because if you're an American and you look at that concept of government coming in to regulate a sport, horrible.
But generally speaking,
Yeah.
for you, and again, I know I can't go into the detail,
No.
but in advising Manchester City, now obviously they weren't going to get relegated, but for Everton,
Yes.
you had a real situation where with Nottingham Forest, other teams in the Premier League, the season could have been decided off the pitch in a courtroom, not on the pitch.
Well, you would have been betting on panels rather than on decisions being on the outcome of games, which would have been perverse in itself. So, and that's I think what needs to change.
In what way?
In that, I don't think they should influence what happens on the pitch.
So we've now got again in the Premier League, if you have to put finances in, same as other countries, if you get them in, you're then judged on whether you've complied or not complied in a particular season. Is that right?
Correct. Yeah.
And it's the same in Portugal?
Yeah, I think it's a trend all over UEFA. I mean, we have the financial fair play rules, but clubs internally, they also have their own integrity and financial regulations. So I think it's very important.
So does regulation, in your view, for, again, people who are involved in clubs in the audience or lawyers advising their clients, does regulation have a place to play where penalties should impact on whether a club is actually judged by what it's done off the field rather than on it?
I think so, yes. What I think, well, to repeat myself and what I said about VAR, I think common standards should be defined by UEFA to be implemented locally, because it doesn't make sense. We have countries with very tight regulations, financial regulations, and other countries with not so tight financial regulations, but then they can take advantage of those regulations or the lack of regulation.
I mean, Julian, for you in the Premier League, is it clear that if you're a member club, if my club Bournemouth decides to get it wrong on the finances, is it clear what will happen to Bournemouth?
No, it's not. And I'm afraid the cases themselves that have been involved have left the situation pretty unclear, and that's one of the reasons why it doesn't work, in my view.
So you've got two Everton decisions, a Nottingham Forest
decision, and they all still pretty much say it's up to each panel to decide what the penalty should be.
So no certainty.
No, the EFL have a better structure to it.
But English Football League. So
English Football League have a better structure to it. But as Fernando says, I think a centralised system which applies to all jurisdictions would be much better.
I mean, for instance, in Portugal, there's no sanction for a club that goes into administration.
No.
Court administration, there's no sanction. Yeah. So it means that they misbehave with their financials the previous season. Maybe they hired players they couldn't afford. Maybe they didn't pay suppliers or agents but they've still competed. And so it's one of the areas I think there should be, more or less, they find some common standards.
It should be uniform. And the EFL, again, is 9 points deduction.
So English Football League, 9 points.
Yeah.
And that's what happens. Doesn't it cause problems for you, Mario, for your members, if depending which league they're playing in? Because within European competition, one presumes that if a club in Portugal does the same thing and breaches the rules, same club as England, and yet there's different sanctions, it could impact on your European competition.
Yeah, I mean, actually, it's one point that we have pressed UEFA to put pressure on the NAs is to implement the same licensing procedure that exists at UEFA level, because that creates an imbalance in competition, because obviously clubs that are participating in UEFA competitions, because they need to comply with very strict requirements and overdue payables, certain things about sustainability, about women's football. Obviously, those clubs that don't care about UEFA competitions, they are not doing anything, right? So they're just not paying probably salaries, or they don't have the correct structure. So that creates a bit of an imbalance. You say, well, okay, but if you're competing in UEFA, it's because you have a better everything, so it makes sense. But one thing that we're pushing with UEFA is to actually have at each national association the same licensing requirements that exist at UEFA level. And then in that way, you can bring all clubs to the same position. So if a club fails to comply with certain aspects, then they would lose the license to participate even at national level, not only at UEFA competitions. So it's something we're pushing for, yeah.
So we're looking here, again, a common theme, that we're looking for more consistency. It isn't there at the moment. And that's before we move on to talk about ownership of clubs. I'm going to start with Mario again, actually. Not that I'm picking on Mario, but multi-club ownership. I mean, we've probably done 150 transactions in our team over the last few years on financing or investment or buying and selling clubs. Isn't it almost, it also becomes impossible to know actually who owns what, given that interweaving. You take John Textor, that's been linked with Everton. When he bought Lyon, there's various funders behind him, various limited partner shareholders. What's your view? What's your members' view on how we even begin from a legal perspective to regulate?
Well, again, I don't think I can express an institutional position on MCOs because...
Personal view.
A personal view, okay. I think from a personal perspective, I think the first thing is to realize what the governing bodies can actually do with such a complex thing, right? I mean, we tend to think FIFA and UEFA are these like super big corporations that have almost unlimited power. They don't. They're private entities that have limited powers. They're not the governments, they're not the police, they're not public entities. Now, if they are to be to regulate MCOs, I think it has to be on the basis of two principles: that it's integrity of competitions, obviously, and competitive balance, right? So every single decision that is made in the terms of FCO has to have those overarching principles in mind, if I can put it like that. And then that comes from what actually each of them can do. UEFA has done something for the past more than 20 years, I think. I mean, a rule of non-common ownership has from the late 90s, I think. So that's nothing new. Obviously, that rule has evolved to the last, maybe you know better than me this point, but to the last rule that is 30%, no more than 30%. They are qualifying as undue influence, that they call it.
Yeah.
But then UEFA, again, is from a competition organizer kind of perspective, right? Because UEFA cannot regulate like FIFA can. Now, if FIFA is going to start regulated MCOs, I mean, they are not going to do it from a competition organizer perspective. They're going to do it like a proper governing body. And that could entail, for instance, limitations around loans, limitations that already exist, limitations about transfer of players between the same clubs. But that's going to be it, right? I don't see how they can limit or how can they regulate who owns a football club. I don't think that that is the job of UEFA and FIFA. It has to be, it's more, I think it overpasses their capabilities.
I think Fernando's beginning to mutter there.
Yeah, exactly.
What's your view, Fernando?
Well, it's an interesting topic. I mean, there was this study of UEFA. In 2015, there were in Europe 40 clubs involved in multi-club ownership groups. And last year, the number increased to 180. So it's a big, big increase. So and involving 6,500 players already that have contracts with clubs that are part of MCO groups. So it is becoming a big issue, and we have been sometimes surprised with UEFA's decisions. They're not. I mean, they've accepted Leipzig and so the Red Bull group teams.
And Red Bull bought a slice of Leeds
exactly
today.
where they said that no, there's no connection whatsoever between these two clubs, and they're completely separated. Okay, that's a position. Then last year, Mario already mentioned that the decision was made that two clubs entering the same competition, they could only own 30% of each other. They couldn't trade players between themselves and other restrictions. And now for Girona, apparently there will be another different decision because it's part of the City Group. So they let Girona compete in a certain way, provided that it's not a majority stake. And so some kind of different decisions which are not very, very good and stable. My position is this one. Listen, the same problems we had with TPO, we have with club ownership.
So player
Exactly.
ownership's changed to club ownership.
Exactly. So that's so problems like influence and conflicts of interest you have with MCO. So and that sometimes we don't know who's behind this club, who's the ultimate beneficial owner, who's behind the decisions of buying and selling players, and this might have an impact on the integrity of the game and the outcome of the competitions, because sometimes you just really ask yourself, why is this player being sold to this club? It doesn't make sense from a sports perspective, from a financial perspective. So it's really I think we would like at least to see who are the. It would have to be public, so that it could be checked. Who are the ultimate beneficial owners of each group, of each club, so that we would know.
And I mean, certainly in our experience, if you've got a major financial institution, private equity, you might have a figurehead. Some say Todd Bowley is a figurehead at Chelsea, but who really does own a football club? That's another panel for another day. But Julian, from your perspective then, doesn't it make it just incredibly difficult for a governing body to bring in rules that all of us in the audience might want to try and interpret?
I think it does, but multi-club ownership is here to stay, so we're going to have to get used to it. It has many benefits. Academies being developed properly and a centralized system. So, and in effect, that could be a seminar in itself. But I think the direct or indirect influence aspect needs to be properly defined by FIFA and UEFA and looked at. Because even if you own, say, 15%, you could be running that club, which would be direct influence. Yep. So, you know, in many ways, it makes a mockery of this 29.9%. So that needs looking at. And equally, you could own 70%, but not have any influence in theory, because you've got a new management team.
Manchester United.
So yeah, if you look at the Manchester United situation, even though I think Jim Ratcliffe owns 29.9% or whatever it is, the reality is he's managing the whole club as well as Nice. So question, I'm not sure how it's going to be resolved.
For those of you who do delve into the Soccer X archives, we had a very good panel, probably a year before last actually, in Miami with Omar Barada, who's now at Manchester United, and Paul Conway and others talking about this very issue. Mm-hmm. And it is incredibly difficult because obviously what we're seeing is there's a whole wave of money that wants to get into football, and particularly European football and Portuguese.
Especially from the United States. And I mean, the concept of common ownership is very common in the United States. You in many different competitions, in many of the big sports that I have, not only soccer, of course, or football, but it's very common for them to have joint ownership of different NBA clubs or NFL clubs or whatever. So it's for them it's very common, and because they are investing a lot in European football, I don't know what the outcome is going to be.
Well, I get this. I know we didn't discuss this question, and Mario's looking suspiciously at me, but just hypothetically, I think every club in the Belgian First Division is owned by American investors. What if they decided that they didn't want to have any promotion and relegation anymore, because you don't have that in the States? And that would be a legitimate decision of the owners of that league. How would we as lawyers be able to respond to something like that? Because I know that is a fear across Europe. What do you think, Mario?
I mean, to give a context, for instance, in Mexico it happened, right? In Mexico, they suspended the promotion relegation for the past 5 years. And it was just a decision from the owners. It was challenged at CAS, actually, and the clubs of the second division lost. But I think Europe is different because of the market, the European market. So any kind of decision within the European market that would try to limit that kind of access or that kind of, I mean, it would have to touch access to the market. It would have touched this European model of sports that everybody talks about. I think it's way more difficult to implement such a big measure because of that. That doesn't mean that it cannot actually happen, but because of the European market, I think extremely difficult without being an EU lawyer. So,
Julian?
I mean, why would you get rid of relegation and promotion? It's what brings the excitement and the biggest game in the world in the playoff.
Why would you is a question that's often asked, and I'm conscious we've got about 5 or 6 minutes, and we're very happy to take questions. European Super League, why would you, Fernando? I mean, it's still alive by the looks of it. Decision from the Spanish courts.
Yeah, very recent decision. We'll see how it goes and how is the European Court of Justice going to decide on that. But yeah, I think they'll go for it. They'll try it. But to be honest with you, I don't know where they can fit in terms of calendar the games of the Super League, because I mean, big clubs in Europe, they have their national competitions during the weekend. Midweek they have the Champions League. Where would you fit the Super League games? It just doesn't seem to be possible. But I think they'll have a go for it.
I mean, you'd say something's got to give, and I know there's another panel talking about the demands on players as a whole different conversation. But something would have to give, and money often talks. What do you think, Mario?
I mean, in my view, the Super League is kind of dead. I don't think it's...
No matter the amount of money that they come up with?
I don't think so. I mean, one thing is because of what Fernando was saying about the calendar, but also because, I mean, everything that they have proposed so far, it has already been thought about. I mean, if you analyze exactly what they are proposing, it's not anything new. I mean, the new system that they proposed like a couple of years ago or a year ago, it was already discussed in 2019 and it was rejected by the majority of clubs. So, I mean, for me at least at the moment, it's really unclear exactly what is it that they want. There is a new format of Champions League coming in that was approved by all clubs, that it's approved by UEFA. So all in all, I don't think that it's ever going to happen. Leaving the nuance that in the future, what I think also considering what the courts have said and without going into too much technicalities, I think the next step is that A22 will request UEFA for an approval of their competition, whichever it is. UEFA will refuse it, most likely, and then we will be discussing here maybe in 2 years' time, again, a new decision on a new new competition, with the difference is that there's no new pre-authorization rules, so it's going to be on the basis of new rules that are better drafted, that are more comprehensive, that if you look into the nuances here and there, it basically prevents anybody from actually having the champions of Europe in your own competition. So if you cannot have that, what can you have? So for me, it's just not something that's not going to happen.
So what do you think, Julian, as a Liverpool fan? You're not fearful of this?
No. I agree with Mario. Certainly from the Premier League clubs I've spoken to, there's no interest in the Super League anymore. And I think the interest is mainly from the Spanish clubs, obviously Real Madrid and Barcelona. They need it more than other clubs need it. My understanding is Juventus are not that interested in it anymore. So I just don't see it happening. And I think we also need to remember that the reason why the government decided to try and intervene and regulate football was because of the Super League and not because of clubs not falling within financial fair play rules.
And to that end, I say as a Liverpool fan, you've experienced what happens when certain owners come in and they almost get driven out of town.
Correct. And they won't go down that route again.
On that note, we've got a few minutes left. Are there any questions that anybody would like to raise, legal or otherwise, for our panel? Or we're deadly quiet in the audience. In that case, so in summary, we're saying this is why you need lawyers, because there is so much uncertainty, so much lack of consistency. You're seeing that ownership in Portugal. You've done so many transactions, Fernando, but where that leads is questionable. Yeah. And for you, Mario, key issues for you coming up?
The calendar is going to be very important. FIFPro and the leagues are not happy with the current calendar, so that's going to create a lot of issues in the future. Yeah.
And Julian?
I still think the financial fair play issues it's going to be something that will create issues and further disputes and litigations for years to come, I'm afraid. So,
On that positive, happy note for all of you who are lawyers in the audience.
it's good for me.
Well, I just say thank you to Julian, to Mario, to Fernando for such insight. I hope that's been a bit more fun and practical than a very dry, let's look at every single law we could think of. Thank you for attending, and we'll no doubt see you all in Miami, hopefully. Bye for now. Thank you.